I'm Nicholas Benish, the head of a nonprofit called the Board Director Training Institute of Japan, or just BDTI for short. We focus on director and governance training. We also provide normalized big data disclosed by all listed Japanese companies, collecting unique data and text using AI techniques. I started BDTI 11 years ago after a career as an investment banker at JP Morgan and then at my own advisory boutique. Along the way, I started to sit on corporate boards here in Japan and have done that for almost 13 years. In 2013, I proposed to the Japanese government that it needed to create a corporate governance code and then ended up ceding many of the provisions in that first code. If I say so myself, I've also been the thought leader behind a number of other reforms here. Thanks to the generosity of BDTI's donors, who are mainly institutional investors, I've been honored to lead BDTI for more than a decade. This has been at a net loss to my personal net worth, but in the meantime, we have trained more than 2,200 persons at our intensive courses and have spread the concept of director training in Japan, where previously it was rather rare. I've engaged in this rather masochistic exercise with the future of my grandchildren in mind. I will be gone from this world in another 20 years or so, but they will have to live long after me, and they will have to deal with the crises that civilization is approaching all too fast. Greenhouse gases, climate change, pollution, biodiversity loss, overfishing, and other kinds of externalized damage that our economies inflict more and more each day. The professionalization of directorship and the fine-tuning of our capital market system are incredibly important in addressing these problems. So while training directors, I've also tried to think hard of more effective solutions related to sustainability and ESG investing for a long time, and that is why I wrote this article. In teaching about governance, I became painfully aware that many executives and investors do not seem to fully understand what corporations are legally. Although I am trained as a lawyer, I myself became increasingly aware that we are using a corporate legal framework that was designed 170 years ago to suit the capital raising needs of an industrial revolution and capital markets that were tiny compared to now. But that this basic framework has not been updated very much since then and is no longer fit for purpose, looking forward to the needs of 2050. Corporations are very real legal fictions that are created by the state in order to confer legal person status that provides a single counterparty for others to deal with and to make it easy to bundle and transfer economic interests. But their most defining characteristic is that governments also confer limited liability to them. This means that general shareholders may lose the money they put up to buy the stock they own, but even if the activities of the companies blow up the housing market or create a health crisis by selling opioids or asbestos, and as a result, the company or bank goes bankrupt, general investors will not have to pay anything more to compensate the remaining claimants, who therefore may end up receiving no redress. The liability of general shareholders has been limited by law to the money they put up in order to make it extremely easy for companies to raise huge amounts of capital. But with huge capital raising and investment amounts necessarily comes the possibility of larger and larger externalized risk and loss. Climate change is simply the most obvious and largest example of such externalized damage. In this article, I imagine what advice very logical-minded aliens from another planet that survived a similar crisis might want to give us. These aliens tell us the way that they redesigned their corporate laws and capital markets so as to prevent a dystopian future before it was too late. They suggest that we ask our questions like these. Question number 1. Limited liability is a privilege of immense value, but it is being given to shareholders of corporations for free, even though it is never given directly to individuals who, in contrast, stand to lose all their wealth, not just the money they put up, if their activities cause damage. The law allows, or allowed long ago, this privilege to make it easy to raise money to fund the Industrial Revolution. But at this point in history, when capital markets are now massive and 80% of stock is held by institutions, not individuals, Does it still make sense to give full limited liability to all shareholders? Shouldn't larger pools of capital facilitate the ability to provide a degree of insurance to society for large collective risks to which investee companies have contributed or may have contributed with all that money they raised? Question number 2. Trading and liquidity have increased dramatically during the past 170 years. So today, does it really still make sense that shareholders be able to immediately escape all future losses or liability just by selling the stock? Well, didn't they elect the current board, which oversaw present policies and will continue on after they sell? Institutional investors preach about accountability to executives. Are those same fund managers themselves and their institutions held to account enough for their own engagement in proxy voting activities and the results, or lack thereof? What about executives and other insiders who may have special insights about the company's future, long-term future? Is it right that they escape all future losses just by selling now? Question number 3. ESG ratings can only go so far, especially for people sitting outside of a company. The plain truth is that they really cannot know many of the factors that will affect the sustainability of that company 25 years from now, including new factors that may arise and how they may affect sustainability. The people who are in a much better position to know these things are directors, executives, and employees sitting inside the company, but only if they are incentivized to think hard about those issues and actually do something right now. Does our present system of executive compensation provide enough incentives to think 25 years out, but act now? Especially when you consider that most long-term incentive compensation, such as restricted stock, usually vests in less than 5 years? Question number 4. Regulations and liability will likely become stricter in the future to address risks such as climate change. For instance, there will probably be a carbon tax. Funds will be needed to pay for fines and damage awards for other events. If funds are not available, more damage will simply be externalized and borne by unrelated parties in the future, namely society and our children, my grandchildren. Why should those who own no stock at all bear most of the risk that will result from continuing to allow full limited liability? Question number 5. When you think about it, modern technology should be able to easily trace back ownership and accountability to all parties who held the stock in the last 7 years or so, including to each asset manager and each beneficial owner. Wouldn't complete transparency of ownership, rather than hiding behind custody account names, facilitate incentives to actively engage and vote in a more responsible fashion? It seems crystal clear to me that we need to put in place stronger structural incentives for shareholders to vote wisely now and for directors and executives to act wisely now regarding things that will affect the future over the long term. ESG is an attractive concept as far as it goes, but its incentive drivers are very weak because most executives and directors will not be affected in 15 years. That is the main theme of this article. We have to think much harder about incentives throughout the entire investment chain. Many people will not feel comfortable discussing these issues, in many cases because, frankly, they benefit from our current systemic design. And I would be the first to admit that these issues cannot be addressed and solved easily or immediately. That is exactly why I am raising them now. I hope this article can spur a much more deeper discourse about ways to structure corporate law and capital markets so that they truly serve the future needs of society.